Good day, Potterheads. We are continuing on with Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always by Dead Woodpecker. And here we've got Chapter 18, Dementors.
Chapter 18, Dementors. Chapter text. Mr. Potter. McGonagall's icy, annoyed voice cut straight through Harry's thoughts and brought him back to third-year Transfiguration. He started, all thoughts of Pettigrew and the fact that he had not yet escaped flying out of his mind, and stared up at her guiltily. Judging by the way her lips had thinned to the point that they looked as though they had been drawn on by an especially fine quill, this was not the first time she had attempted to get his attention. "Yes, Professor. Perhaps you would like to answer the question," she said. "If it isn't too much to ask that you focus your attention on my class." Harry gritted his teeth. He had no idea what the question was. He looked around the classroom, trying to find clues. He caught Neville's eye, but he seemed just as mystified, and Hermione was sitting with Ron today, so she could not help either. Each student sat with a rather ordinary-looking wooden box on the desk in front of him. Sorry, Professor. Could you repeat the question? Why is it that, when you have transfigured the wooden box into a loaf of bread, you will not be able to eat it and gain sustenance from it?" she asked icily. "Oh," Harry said, relieved. "That's because it defies Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. Wizards and witches can't make food out of nothing." He'd learned that the hard way during their year on the run, living in a tent and having to eat mushrooms most of the time. "And would you care to have guess as to why this is so?" she pressed. Harry thought about it. It was something that he had not done at the time when Hermione had told them about Gamp's infernal law. He had accepted it as truth, as he did most things that Hermione said, and moved on. So why wasn't it? An image of Peter Pettigrew as Scabbers flitted across his thoughts. "I reckon it's because, take an animagus, for example. They don't actually become the animal, they just look like it. That's why animagi can change back and forth. If they were too much like their animal, they'd never change back. So, when we transfigure something, we're still just changing what it looks like. We can use it, and it's relatively permanent. But the loaf of bread we make today will remember that it's still just a box." "That was well reasoned, Mr. Potter," she said stiffly. 5 points to Gryffindor. Harry was a little surprised by this. Ever since the mostly disastrous Christmas holidays, she had been very cool toward Harry. All the teachers had been except Hagrid. Harry was not sure that Hagrid even knew what had happened. He had not said anything about it. And last week he had seen Harry and Ron speaking to each other behind his hut, and he had not attempted to force them apart. Harry and Ron had been discussing Pettigrew and his escape from Azkaban prison. The whole school, indeed the entire wizarding world, could speak of little else. No one had escaped the Dementors before. Everyone had thought that Azkaban was one of the safest places to keep prisoners, and the terror was palpable. Harry had been relieved when the news broke. It had happened in April, well over a year after Snape had confounded him. For a few weeks, Harry had been certain that the plan was working. Not flawlessly, of course. He firmly pushed away images of the Weasleys, but enough so that he felt reasonably confident that Wormtail would find his master. And then Wormtail was sighted in Aberholloway, a small town with a large population of wizards. It was only 150 kilometers away from Hogwarts. The Ministry was entirely useless, of course. Worse than useless. Harry thought that the fear caused by Wormtail's escape had addled their small brains. They had sent the Dementors after Pettigrew, and the Dementors had searched Aberholloway thoroughly. One man had been mistaken for Wormtail, and had been given the kiss before the Aurors could even blink. Not that the Ministry had reported that blunder. Sirius, who had been watching as Dumbledore had told him to, had witnessed it. Harry had hoped that it was an aberration, that Wormtail had been confused when he first escaped. But he had been seen again by a squib just the other day in another small village, one that was less than 70 kilometers away from Hogwarts. Harry feared that something had gone badly wrong. So did Dumbledore, who had dispatched both Sirius and Remus to attempt to find Pettigrew and bring him back to Hogwarts, where they could renew the Confundus charm and send him to Voldemort. "Mr. Potter, what is it that is so much more important than transfiguration? May I remind you that the exams are swiftly approaching?" Harry looked around again. Everyone had their wands out and were attempting, with various degrees of success, to transfigure their boxes into loaves of bread. Peter Pettigrew, he finally answered honestly. The entire class stilled. Neville gave him a swift look out of the corner of his eye and stopped muttering and tapping his wand against his half-box half-loaf. "I understand that you must be quite upset," she said almost gently. "But the Ministry is making every effort to capture him. You mustn't think that he will be free for much longer." He felt mildly disoriented by the fact that she, who had been tortured into insanity in the future, was bidding him not to be concerned by the fact that Wormtail, whom he hoped would not be recaptured by the Dementors, had escaped. He blinked away the confusion. "Yeah," he said after a few moments. "I suppose you're right." He gave all of his attention to transfiguring the box in front of him for the rest of the class. It was difficult, even though he had been putting greater effort into transfiguration this year, both in the classroom and in the room of requirement. He, Neville, Hermione, and Luna had spent just last night attempting to learn the extremely difficult human transfiguration. Future knowledge did not help as much when it was not defense spells, and he was trying his best right along with them. Ron and Ginny had reported similar difficulties when they met with the others instead of Harry. Harry walked out of the class, 5 steps behind Ron. They both loitered around the door, waiting for Hermione to finish her other class. There was much jostling out in the corridor as everyone else slowly filed out. They were all whispering about Wormtail. All were quite relieved that Professor McGonagall had reassured them that the Ministry was doing everything it could. "She's right, you know," Lavender Brown whispered to Seamus Finnegan. "The Ministry isn't going to just let him go free. Me, ma'am, says it's only a matter of time before he's caught," Seamus said confidently. "No one escapes from the Dementors." Ron snorted loudly. "Sorry," he laughed. "But Pettigrew already did escape from Azkaban. He's probably running around as a rat, and they can't even tell." Harry tried to hide his smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "Weasley, Potter." Professor McGonagall swept out of the room, carrying a large stack of books. "What are you two doing?" Waiting for Hermione, they both said at once. "Weasley leave," she said. "Do I need to remind you of the conditions your mother gave us?" "It's my day for Hermione," Ron said indignantly. She looked weary. "Fine then. Potter, get to your next class." Harry obeyed with alacrity, though he wondered what Professor McGonagall made of the fact that he, Ron, and Ginny shared their friends. She had to have noticed that Hermione spent 3 days of the week sitting with Ron and 2 with Harry. Neville spent 3 days with Harry and 2 with Ron. But she hadn't said anything to either of them, and Harry hoped that Mrs. Weasley did not know about this. What if she told Ron to stop seeing Hermione and Neville as well? His thoughts carried him all the way to Professor Octavius' classroom. He grimaced. He'd spent the last several days working on the vicious homework assignment the professor had given them, but he still felt as though it would not receive the best marks. He'd been alternating receiving an acceptable and exceeds expectations, but as they were set to translate more difficult runes, he felt himself slipping. Harry put his things beside his seat, pulled out his long translation scroll, and hurriedly made a few corrections. Daphne Greengrass joined him after a moment. "What did you get for Sahav?" she asked quietly. Before Harry could tell her, Professor Octavius strode in and summoned their scrolls. "Congratulations," he said. "You have completed the course of study for your 3rd year. As the exams are coming up in a few weeks, I will expect you to learn more runes. However, as I fully believe that revision should be done on your own time, I have decided to give you a small preview of what you will be studying next year." Hermione looked excited. Her face gleamed. Harry could see it from all the way across the classroom. Everyone else, who did not have her seemingly effortless skill, looked as weary as Harry felt. He found himself thinking, not for the first time, that perhaps he should have taken divination again after all. Ancient runes was a challenge that he had not expected. "Ah," Professor Octavius said. "I see that you, excepting Miss Granger, are as challenged by this class as all the other 3rd years who came before you. It is as I expected, although I can promise, as you will see in a few moments, that it will get even more difficult before it gets easier." Anyone care to hazard a guess as to why? Hermione immediately raised her hand, nearly knocking Ron in the head as she did so. "Professor, Is it because we haven't yet learned the higher runes? He nodded and permitted a small smile. Indeed, Miss Granger, you have been working simple concepts. The names of animals, for one. Various names for inanimate objects you might find in a house or around a school. The difficulty you have faced in learning these are not merely because it is always a challenge to learn a foreign language. As I told you the first day, your own magic is being challenged as much as your brain's. Harry knew that was true. Whenever he finished his homework, he felt exhausted, and he had to really push himself to practice the charms and transfiguration required by Professor Flitwick and Professor McGonagall. He knew now that Hermione's exhaustion last time, and this time, was not just caused by the fact that she was traveling back in time to attend more classes than any other student. Today, Professor Octavius continued. I'm going to show you the runes that match the higher concepts. Some of them you will study next year. Some of them will wait until 5th, 6th, or 7th years. Then why does he want us to see them now? Harry thought, confused. Why are we seeing them now, then? Ron asked. Professor Octavius paused. As I've already said, Ancient Runes is a difficult class. I trust you lot believe me now. Some find, in their 4th year or their 5th, that it is simply too much. I believe that it won't be too much for any of you, but if it is, I suggest you seek out your head of house and ask to be placed in a different class. There was a rather sober silence. Switching to a different class was not something that many students wished to do. Harry and Ron had stuck with divination because they could not bring themselves to leave and join another class when they'd be an entire year behind. He eyed the velvety case that had just appeared on Professor Octavius' desk. Come and choose, Professor Octavius ordered. Quietly. You're to study them for the next hour. I would also like you to draw what you see. If you feel like you can define it, and no, I'm not expecting it, please give your reasons for doing so. Take your time. There will be no unsatisfactory marks given for this assignment. Harry lined up behind Hannah Abbott. He grabbed the first rune he touched and took it back to his seat. He took out a piece of parchment and stared at the small slab of silver, upon which was etched a very complex rune. How was he supposed to define it? Daphne Greengrass looked just as mystified and more than a little annoyed. He glanced over at Ron's and Hermione's side of the classroom. Hermione was already drawing feverishly. Ron just stared blankly. What am I supposed to be seeing? He asked himself. Then, thinking that he might have it upside down, he turned it around. It still didn't bring anything to mind, so he shrugged and began to draw it. As he drew, he began thinking of Wormtail again. Where is he? Why is he apparently on his way to Hogwarts? For the first time in a while, Harry fully appreciated the fact that he had played a part in releasing Wormtail to the world once more. The man who had betrayed Harry's parents to Voldemort and set his destiny in motion. He felt a little burst of pain at the thought. His parents whom he had always loved, and yet had never known. And Wormtail was also responsible for Sirius' false imprisonment. Sirius, who had trusted Harry without question, and was still haunted by what the Dementors had done to him. He'd spent an extra year and a half being tormented because of Harry. Harry stared at the rune again once he realized that he'd stopped drawing. It seemed to shimmer a little, and Harry blinked. He still had no idea what it meant, but he could figure it out once he completed the assigned task. He glanced over at Ron again, his quill hovering over the parchment. He missed being able to speak with him openly, and though they found time in the room of requirement, they were missing out on the more relaxed times. The twins and Percy were always with him, and Ginny during meal times and in the common room. And Ginny. He paid little attention to what his quill was doing as she popped into his thoughts. These past few months had been painful. The small amount of time they were able to meet was just not enough. Never enough. Because of the Weasleys. His stomach clenched. He had Sirius and Remus, and that was a very bright thing. But he missed Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and the way it had been. Sometimes it felt like a physical ache. He understood their point of view. He really did. But that somehow made it hurt even more. He thought about Always and Always, and the fact that Harry had burned bridges so badly with the Weasleys that he might as well have used Fiendfire. Harry wiped the sweat off his brow. He looked down at his parchment and felt a jolt of shock. The rune he had drawn somewhat blindly. He did not recognize all of it, but he saw with perfect clarity a shape that was very familiar indeed. He saw in the mirror every day, and there it was plain as day, the exact size and shape of his lightning scar, drawn in his own hand. Suddenly, he knew exactly what this rune meant, and why he had been so distracted while he had drawn it, and what he had been distracted with. This rune means pain, he wrote quickly. Emotional and physical pain. He left it at that. Can't you take that thing off? Hermione said peevishly. No one's around. It's weird to talk to you when you're just a disembodied voice. Harry reluctantly pulled off his invisibility cloak. She was right. She, Harry, and Neville sat beside the lake on a sunny, summer afternoon, quizzing each other on charms. Everyone else was inside the castle, it seemed, but still, Harry had gotten into the habit of wearing it pretty much wherever he was, and he felt slightly naked without it. Happy now? He asked sourly. Yes, she replied primly. It's a good thing he usually wears it, Neville said. He lay on his back and held up a thick stack of parchment, Hermione's notes for the entire year, to block the sun. You saw what the Weasley twins did to him yesterday. I didn't actually, Hermione said distractedly. But I heard. Harry, you really ought to have told the professor. Why? Harry asked, very uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. He did not want to talk with Hermione and Neville about the Weasleys. They had, thus far, been able to avoid it since the other two had reinforced their friendship with him. It was just the Jellylegs jinx. And I don't care. Hermione opened her mouth to say something, but seemed to think better of it. Ron was furious, Neville said. And so was Ginny. I think they're going to try to get them back somehow. I wish we could meet all together in the room of requirement again, Hermione said quietly. It doesn't feel right. Either we're missing you, or we're missing them. Yeah, Harry agreed. It felt very cold all of a sudden, and not as pleasant. Harry, Neville said. Something in the tone of his voice made Harry look up. Neville looked very serious all of a sudden, and Harry had the feeling that something had been weighing on his mind for a while. Is the secret that you and Ginny are, in love? Damn it, Neville. Not in front of Hermione. Harry wanted to shout. Not that he did not want to tell her, but this wasn't the right time. They were too young still. And something told him that Hermione Granger would not be as patient and willing to wait as Neville Longbottom. What secret? Hermione asked immediately. Harry felt the weight of her stare. Harry and Ron and Ginny aren't telling us something, Neville told her. Harry resisted the urge to silence him. Hermione would find that extremely suspicious, and any hope he would have of getting out of this without telling them everything would be gone. Not that I know how I'm going to deflect this. What do you mean? Neville, Harry said quietly. Neville ignored him. I've thought it since last year. When Harry saved Ginny from that basilisk. I thought it might be about you-know-who for the longest time. I asked Harry about it, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. But after Christmas, I started to think maybe it wasn't. Harry, Hermione said sharply, but Harry could not gather his scattered thoughts, and it seemed as though he was watching himself from a great distance. Now was not the time for this, and this was not the place. Harry said that he would tell me what it was. Neville continued relentlessly, but that I wasn't old enough. And then when we, heard about what happened with him and Ginny, I thought that might be it. Why would he tell you that you were too young? They were now speaking about him, as though he wasn't there. You're a day older than he is. I don't know, Neville said uncertainly. I think you're right, Neville, Hermione said. She had a vague, unfocused look on her face. I've thought a bit odd, all along, ever since Christmas, anyway. Ginny told me that it wasn't, as bad as the twins and Percy obviously think it is. But why is Ron being so understanding? Neville shrugged. He still likes Harry, and they still spend time all together. Neville looked at Harry furtively. I saw them all come out of the room of requirement together a few weeks ago. Hermione's eyebrows slammed together. But Ron was going on yesterday about how stupid it was that he couldn't see Harry. Harry definitely felt chilled now, though he knew it wasn't due to the weather. Listen, so is it because you and Ginny are together? Neville asked him, and Ron knows. Yes, Harry lied desperately. He's lying, Hermione said incredulously. That's not it, Neville. That isn't even a secret anymore. The whole school knows what happened over the Christmas holidays. The entire sky seemed to darken at her words, and Harry eyed her nervously, before realizing that Hermione, powerful though she was, could not cause the sun to dim. He looked up and saw a bank of black, angry clouds rolling slowly toward Hogwarts. The temperature dropped another few degrees. "Harry," Hermione said in a low voice. "What is going on?" Harry stared at her helplessly. She looked quite confused and more than a little angry. If he did not tell her, if he lied to her, something would break between them. Harry did not know if she would be able to trust him any longer. He opened his mouth, resigned. "Ron and Ginny." But he was interrupted by the arrival of Ron's Patronus. It landed practically in Harry's lap. Pettigrew at Hogwarts. Whomping Willow. "Dementors," it yelled with Ron's voice, and faded away almost immediately. "Was that Ron?" Neville said. Harry looked up at the sky. He should have known that the darkness and the cold were not natural. How many times had he been in a Dementor-infested area? "Get back to the school," he ordered them. He'd stood up, and now he looked down on them both. "Get back to the school right now." He did not wait for their response, but spun around and, leaving his invisibility cloak, sprinted toward the Whomping Willow. Was Pettigrew a rat or a man? Neither option was very good. A rat would be difficult for him to spot, and a man was vulnerable to the kiss. Why did he come back to Hogwarts? Snape suspected that the Confundus charm had worn partially away. But if that was true, then why was he here? Was he going to try to kill Harry? "Harry!" Hermione shouted. He looked back, and with a plunging feeling in his stomach, he saw that both Hermione and Neville were racing after him. "What are you doing? Get back to the castle!" Harry bellowed, but neither showed any intention of doing so. "Ron," said Neville, panted. Harry could barely understand him. He said Pettigrew and Dementors. Harry wished that he had the Marauders map with him, although he knew that Ron's warning had come because he had been watching it. If Pettigrew was transformed, then it would be almost impossible to find him before it was too late. "He's an escaped criminal," Harry shouted behind him. Unbelievably, they were catching up. But Harry's limbs felt tight and sluggish. The Dementors were getting close. "We aren't going to leave you behind," Hermione yelled. "If you want us back at the castle so bad, come with us." Harry shook his head. An icy breeze blasted his face. They were almost there. He stopped. "Stay behind me," he said softly. "Hermione, do you know the spell to reveal an animagus?" She nodded. "If you hear anything, anything at all," Harry continued. "A scuffle, anything. Say it." "Neville," he said in a louder voice. "You're going to have to do the Patronus charm. You too, Hermione." "But I can't," Neville said in a fearful voice. "You've seen me. I only make mist." Harry reached over and shook him. Hard. "Damn it, Neville. Do you feel the cold? That's the Dementors who've been chasing Pettigrew. You're going to have to do it." "But I—" "Shut up. Think of a happy memory. You can't afford not to be able to do it." They stood in a very small triangle. Harry could feel both of them trembling, and he fought the urge to tell them again to leave. It was almost too late anyway, he thought as he saw the puffs of his breath in the suddenly frigid air. There was a slight movement to their left. Hermione squeaked, "Animaravilio," before Harry had to remind her. Nothing happened. Pettigrew did not suddenly appear. "False alarm," Harry murmured. "Probably just one of Hagrid's creatures." And suddenly it was not a false alarm. The grass rustled off to their right, and Harry could hear frightened squeaking. His arm trembled. Whether it was from nerves or cold, he did not know. "Animaravilio," Hermione said again, and Pettigrew spun into his true form, less than 20 meters away from them. He was whimpering and trembling. He sat down on the ground and appeared to be unable to move anymore. The Dementors were right behind him. There were so many of them that Harry felt a ripple of true fear. "Incarcerus!" Harry yelled, and Pettigrew was bound. "Expecto Patronum!" His father stag burst out of his wand and charged the Dementors. They fell back, but there were more and more coming. Harry's arm trembled with the effort. "Do it, Neville, Hermione!" He ran forward, trying to reach Pettigrew before he could be given the kiss. That would ruin everything. Everything. His stag kept charging, but it grew weaker and weaker as it met with more and more. "Don't fail me, don't fail me." "Ex expecto Patronum," He heard Hermione shout, but she sounded too afraid. She'd never been very good at this particular charm. It was the only spell she truly struggled with. Hermione, he bellowed, hoping she would take strength from it. He was halfway to Pettigrew when 10, no, more than 20, broke off from the rest and headed toward Neville and Hermione. Neville and Hermione, who had not yet produced a corporeal Patronus. He looked at Pettigrew, huddled on the ground, screaming. It was an easy decision. Harry halted, spun around, and sprinted back to his friends. Always and always. He could not protect them all, and Neville and Hermione came first. Distant shouts, the professors or Ron, he did not know, came from the direction of the castle. His stag followed him, and with a burst of energy, attacked. Do it! Do it! Harry shouted at Neville and Hermione. He did not spare a glance back at Wormtail. He had no desire to watch the man kissed, despite the fact that he had wrought so much evil. Yet as he watched his stag, charging Dementor after Dementor, he saw a flash of brilliant light. Another Patronus, out of the corner of his eye. He did not turn around, but stood as close to his friends as he could. They kept trying the charm, but neither one of them had succeeded in making more than mist. Please be Dumbledore, he thought. Or Snape. Pettigrew screamed again. It was abruptly cut off. Harry spared a glance and saw him running away. Another Patronus, he could not tell what it was, only that it was not Dumbledore's Phoenix, Ron's dog, Snape's and Ginny's does, held off the Dementors as he scrambled away, jerking forward and stumbling, back the way he had come. Harry was weakening quickly. Neville and Hermione were now huddled on the ground at his feet, and his stag seemed to move in slow motion. The Dementors kept coming and coming, but Harry grimly held his ground. Not Neville and Hermione. Not Neville and Hermione. Not Neville and Hermione. He could hear screaming and a chill that gripped his heart, and knew that he was failing. A flare of silver light erupted before his eyes. Dumbledore's Phoenix spun and swirled in a brilliant dance. More patron uses joined Dumbledore's. At that same moment, Harry's stag faded away. Harry fell atop Hermione and Neville, too exhausted to move, too drained to call up his stag again. He closed his eyes. Voices woke him. Never seen anything like it. McGonagall's voice. It's fortunate that Dumbledore happened to see what was going on, Professor Flitwick squeaked. They could have been kissed. What's the Ministry's take on this? Remus asked. They're taking the Dementors elsewhere, McGonagall said. All that, and they couldn't even catch Pettigrew. Evil bastard, Sirius muttered. So he's completely gone, is he? No trace. Not yet, Flitwick said. There was a brief silence. Then, it's lucky Potter knew the Patronus charm. I wonder where he learned it. I taught him, Remus lied smoothly. And it wasn't really a lie, Harry thought. His boggart was a Dementor. A Dementor? McGonagall said. I would have expected it to be you-know-who. Doesn't matter, Sirius said. I don't even like to think about what might have happened if he hadn't known how to do it. He would have been kissed, and his two friends as well. So Hermione and Neville were all right. Harry felt a warm feeling of relief that helped dispel the chill that had lodged in his bones. He opened his mouth to say so, and a large slab of chocolate was shoved in. Harry chewed and felt warmth that spread from his toes to the tips of his fingers. You're going to eat this entire bar of chocolate before you even try to talk, Remus said firmly. Your friends are all right. You held off the Dementors very well. I'm quite proud that you managed a corporeal Patronus, Harry. Harry kept eating. He opened his eyes and saw that he was in the hospital wing, of course. Hermione and Neville lay on the beds beside him. Ron sat beside Hermione's bed, looking pale and scared out of his wits. Ginny, next to Neville, stared at Harry. He could hardly take his eyes off of her. Do you think the Weasleys should leave now that he's awake? Flitwick squeaked. Harry finally looked away from her. No, Remus said firmly. None of them are alone together, and Ron and Ginny ought to be allowed to be here when their friends wake up. What happened? Harry said when he'd finally finished his chocolate. We were hoping you could tell us that, Mr. Potter, McGonagall said firmly. We were studying outside, Harry said quickly, for our charms test. And we decided to come back. It was getting cold. Because of the Dementors, Sirius said. They do that. Hermione stirred. Harry looked over at her and saw that her eyes were wide. She knew that he was obviously not telling the truth. Ron bent over and whispered something in her ear. A few moments passed, and she nodded. "Hermione's awake," Ron said loudly. "She'll need some chocolate, too." Madame Pomfrey immediately bustled over to her side and set a huge plate piled with chocolate shavings on the stand next to her. "You're to eat all of that," Madame Pomfrey told Hermione sternly. "No buts." "You were saying, Mr. Potter?" McGonagall raised her eyebrow. "Then we saw Pettigrew," Harry said, "and the Dementors came right after him. After that, I couldn't really tell you. I used the Patronus charm, and after that it's a bit of a blur, to be honest." He stared at Sirius while he said this, hoping his godfather would know that this was not the entire story. He appeared to understand, for he gave a slight nod. Harry wondered what the other professors made of Sirius' appearance. This was the first time they had seen him since he came out of Azkaban, after all. "May I have some time with my godson?" Sirius asked, as though reading Harry's mind. "I never intended on meeting him in a hospital wing for the first time since he was 1 year old." Harry almost snorted. Sirius had probably never intended on meeting Harry when Harry was dead drunk and shouting at Voldemort at the top of his lungs either. McGonagall looked at Ron and Ginny, who did not look back at her. "I cannot, in good conscience, leave them alone." "Molly Weasley." "I'll stay," Remus said quietly. "And Madame Pomfrey will be here." Hermione and Neville went through quite an ordeal today. I'm sure that they need the comfort of their friends. But even when Flitwick and McGonagall left, he could not speak plainly. Hermione was making good progress on her pile of chocolate, but she stared at Harry like a hawk, despite Ron's best efforts to distract her. And Madame Pomfrey refused to leave her charges, especially when Neville woke up about a half an hour later. Harry could only exchange significant glances, letting them know that he had a bit more to tell them. Not much, just that he suspected Pettigrew had a wand. Wormtail had to have been the one to cast that Patronus. Ron and Ginny finally left when Madame Pomfrey shooed them away to go eat their dinner in the Great Hall. Remus and Sirius left soon after, probably to meet with Dumbledore and Snape, who had been absent from the hospital wing all afternoon. Harry suspected that they were looking for Pettigrew, and then he was alone with Neville and Hermione, with only Madame Pomfrey as a reason not to pick up the conversation they had been having earlier. Harry avoided their gazes and forced himself to eat more chocolate. The lights grew dim, and Madame Pomfrey retired to her office. Harry felt like leaping from the bed and escaping, but his legs were still rather shaky, so he did not. "Harry," Hermione said. Harry started. "Yeah. Thank you," she said. Harry looked over at her. She looked very serious, despite the fact that she was wearing a nightgown and had chocolate all over her mouth. "I expect I'll be practicing the Patronus charm a bit more." "Me too," Neville said fervently. Harry lay awake for a long while into the early hours of the morning. Where's Pettigrew now? He thought. He hoped that he was now on his way to Voldemort, but he could not be sure. Dumbledore had poked his head in some time after Madame Pomfrey finally went to bed. When Harry stared at him, hoping for answers, he only shook his head. So he and Snape had not found Pettigrew. He only hoped that the Ministry hadn't either. He also wondered when Neville and Hermione would ask for answers again. He knew that they would. They may be grateful that he had saved their lives and their souls, but he knew Hermione well enough that she would corner him, and probably Ron and Ginny, soon enough. He left the hospital wing before they woke up the next morning. He felt a bit like a coward, but he couldn't tell them just yet. Not until he'd spoken to the other two. He was not watching where he was going, and thus almost knocked Ginny over. He caught her, and she threw herself in his arms. "I was so scared," she whispered fiercely. "Ron told me what was happening, but the twins were being their annoying selves, and we couldn't leave the common room." "It's all right," he murmured. "We're all right." "Pettigrew?" she asked after she finally let go of him. He shook his head. "No idea. I have no idea what." And Percy rounded the corner. He stopped dead when he saw Harry and Ginny together, and Harry was desperately glad that he had not seen them hugging as if they would never let go. There was a long moment of silence, and Harry wondered if he was about to be hexed. Then Percy walked toward them. Harry stepped back. "The twins are coming," Percy said to Ginny. "Better not let them see you with him." Then he walked on, not sparing either of them a glance. Harry gaped after him, unable to believe that Percy Weasley had just warned them and had not said anything to Harry at all. He racked his brain, tried to figure out what this meant. Ginny looked just as stunned as he felt. "We have to talk," she said in a low voice. "I'll get Ron. Meet us in the room of requirement tonight. Wait for us. We'll be there." Harry nodded. They had plenty to talk about. Pettigrew, Hermione, Neville, Percy, so many complications that they could not have foreseen. Harry found himself, a little while later, wandering back to where he had left his invisibility cloak. It had been quite stupid of him to run off without it, and he'd felt uneasy since yesterday. He did not feel right without it, even when he was not wearing it. His gaze swept the patch of grass where they had been sitting 4 times before it really registered that the shimmering cloak was not where he had left it. He spent the next hour searching frantically in wider and wider circles, despite the fact that he was certain where he, Neville, and Hermione had been sitting just a day ago. He finally had to give up. He sat down at the edge of the lake and pulled his legs up to his chest. The fact that someone had stolen his cloak disturbed him a great deal. But what filled his stomach with icy dread was the thought of Ron's and Ginny's reactions. He had not told Ron and Ginny that the Resurrection Stone had been destroyed 2 years ago. He had not wanted them to know, did not want them to know until, but they could not fail to notice that his cloak was gone. And Harry wondered how on earth he was going to tell them that he was going to die.